Tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnā tātou I roto I ngā tini āhuatanga o te rā. Ngā Mahina-a-rangi kia kōtau ko tai mana engari te tuatai. Tēnei ka inui atu nei ki a koe te tuakana kere miha. Hara mai ai hua kino tō tātou nei hui I roti te kareke noa te tuakana. Nau mai rā haere mai.
Tēnei ngā mihi tuatai ki tō tātou whare atu nei. Ki o tātou paupau, o tātou tūpuna. Nā rātu anu ngā kōrero tukuhi ho I tau mai nei ki runga nei a tātou tēnei. Ngā whakamihi atu oki ki o tātou manuhiri. Kai tau I tā mai, ka tika me mihi, I mua I taku karakia no re whakatau mai. Kaere kore, kua tau kē mai koutou ki runga nei a tātou I a te rākau, engari tāku tonu e tautuku ana I rā whakataunga ki runga I a koutou. Manawa mai ai te pūtanga o tēnei ariki, manawa mai ai te pūtanga o tēnei tauira. Ka eke ki arangi ki runga ne, ka eke ki arangi tāuahu. Tēnei te mauri kei ahau nā tu te whiwhia, nukutu te whiwhia, arangi kei te whiwhia I waho, kei te rawia I waho, purutia mai waho, tāwhia mai waho. Tēnei te mauri ka whakapiki, tēnei te mauri ka whakakake. Tēnei te mauri nā tēnei ariki, tēnei te mauri nā tēnei tauira. Tēnei te mauri ka putatu ki te whaiao, ki te amarama. Uhi, wero, haramai te mauri, haumi e, hui e, tāiki e. Tēnā tata. Tēnā koe te tūkana. O tēnā tātou katoa, te tūtei, whai ake ngā karakia tēnei ka mihi ake kia rātou koe ki kirunga te taumatu o te atu. Rātou, ngā tini aitua ki runga I a tātou katoa. Ngā tini aitua, mai te hiko te whaere o putainui ki tōna upoko. Whiti atu tū moana raukawa ki o tātanei whananga I te whare pauna. Ki tōna punga tapu, a hurikau ana ki tērā o ngā ama I te whare kauri I reku. Nō ngā mati take tini ki runga I a tātou, me kore au e wa haina kei wareware. Kei wareware tētē. Tēnei ka mihi ake ki a rātou, rātou katoa take nea tāra whānui e tāne. Haere kōtau, hoki atura. Hoki mai ki a tātou ngā waihotanga. O rātou tēnā o kōtau, tēnā tātou katoa. Hey, awesome. Welcome to have you, welcome to tō tātanei whare, te ara tāwhaki, ki te wāna o raukawa nei, ki tēnei ki o ngā kaupapa. Ki tēnei ki o ngā kaupapa. Ngari te tūtei, we've got to get some housekeeping done. If we have to leave the building for any reason, some emergency, obviously if it's a fire, the alarms will go off and some Pākehā voice will say, evacuate the building, evacuate the building. Okay? And tēnā, ka haere tōtika tātou katoa ki wahora, ki tēnei ki muri huki, and we'll gather out there on the other side of the car park. Yeah? Ka whaera? And then when it's all clear, we'll come back and finish our day. Me he pirangi whare paku, kei tēnei kōkonga o te whare, kei tēnei kōkonga o te whare, whai at the yellow brick road, so there's a yellow wall at the back there, and kei reira. O ko tēnei wai o pūkoro. O ko tēnei wai o pūkoro, weto hia, whaka ngū nei. So turn your phones off or put them on silent so we're not disrupted by that. We will record this, so the you big brother's watching. No, there's a couple of cameras and we've got them filming what's going on here and capturing these as well. So that will be available once Khan's got around to editing it. Ka pai rā. Normally, at the end of any kōrero, there's a few acknowledgements. So we want to do those first so they're not seen as an appendage. First and foremost to Robin Kahukiwa, and you would have seen some of her artwork displayed here. She sends her support for today, and also for allowing us to display her beautiful artwork. Tina Ngata also sends her apologies, and we also mihi to her for leading the Kia Mau movement. Oh, also want to mihi to the Kia Mau movement themselves.
taua kaupapa, and also to our matua moana, ko tai mai te rangi nei, Moana Jackson, and who will provide some closing comments a little later on. So ngā mahina nui ki anatu katoa. Right, we are on a time schedule, so we will push on. So the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, I think that's what they're called, Ministry for Culture and Heritage, they state that Tuia Encounters 250, or Tuia 250, celebrates Aotearoa New Zealand's Pacific voyaging heritage and acknowledges the first onshore encounters between Māori and Pākehā in 1769-1770, and encourages us to use Tuia 250 as an opportunity to hold honest conversations about the past, the present, and how we navigate our shared future. This is one of the things we struggle with, is having honest conversations with others. So today we're going to have an honest conversation with ourselves. We will hear from 3 speakers whose intent is to raise awareness amongst our community about the acts of Cook and the Endeavour 250 years ago, to dispel some myths and look towards why we should or shouldn't be celebrating Cook's arrival here in Aotearoa. So how we'll run this session is that we'll have our 3 guest speakers today, 2 of whom are from Te Whanganui, Kaimahi here Te Whanganui, Ani Mikaere and Mahina-a-rangi Baker. And we also have with us today Dr. Emalani Case from Hawaii, who works at Te Whanganui Wikitoria. We do ask that you hold your questions until the very end, so that we're not limiting their time as speakers. There will be more opportunity for discussions during and after a kai. Once the kōrero has finished, there will be a cup of tea. Kai paku in Te Kete Ururu Tau, that's the room next door. And depending on the āhua and the desire to have further conversations, we may move to another room to have those kōrero. Ka paira, he pātai a kōtau I tēnei ki wā. Ka paira. Now, I asked this gentleman earlier, and so, pai tonu mau e hoa. Okay. I ambushed Hohaia earlier and asked him to come and introduce our speakers. Hohaia is our pau akoranga, so he's the head of our academic matters here on campus. Very learned gentleman. Ngāti parau, but, you know, kind of lives here, so he's all good. The Hohaia, anera wai.
Learned gentleman indeed. I learned to avoid this place from driving around. I was actually on my way down to go and do some carving, and he captured me. I ngā maunga whakahi e noho ki muri au ne, Mauna Kea. Pararua. Rangi, I noho I reira, a koa ka mau koe tō pōtai ka hungunu, mi hiatu tēnei ki a koe e te tuakana, e moana. Our first speaker is Mahina-a-rangi Baker, Aotearoa, Raukawa, tō rangatira. Mahina-a-rangi grew up in Rotaki and is currently the Pautaka Wainga Tai Ao for her iwi Aotearoa ki Whakarongotai, where she is responsible for overseeing the kaitiakitanga work of the iwi. She has just submitted her PhD thesis. Congratulations, Mahina-a-rangi. I actually thought the last time I introduced you, you had just submitted it. Then he was keeping his notes. On Te Kete, Tuatea and Kaitiakitanga water, which she has spoken about at Te Whanganui earlier this year. She has also recently joined our Kaitiakitanga Pūtaiao team at Te Whare Oranga here at Te Whanganui. She has also attended the recent Kia Mau gatherings in Turanganui Akiwa. Tēnā koe, Taina Mataira. She has also attended, and speaks about her experiences there and about the Doctrine of Discovery. Nō reira, e mihi atu i tēnei ki a koe te tuahine, haere mai.
Tēnā rā tātou katoa, haere tonu ngā mihi ki a koutou, ki ngā manuhiri tuarangi, ki ngā manuhiri o te motu nei, no te tī, no te tā, tēnā rā tātou, tēnā koutou oku whanaunga. Ki a koutou ngā rangatahi, tino hari ko te ngākau ki te kiti a koutou he mihi nunui ki a koutou hoki. Huri noa te whare nei, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Ai, no konei ahau, i tupuraki ahau i konei, ko raukawa te marae, ko rangiatia te tuahu, ko kāpiti te motu tapu, ko Mahina-a-rangi baker tōku ingoa. So as Matua was saying, many of us around the country have known for some time that this take Tuia 250 was to arrive on our shores and had seen this as being highly problematic and have joined under a banner of Kia Mau, an organisation that was initiated by Whaia Robin Kahukiwa to create a collective voice in opposition to this tour. And many of us who have an interest in this joined the whānau up in Tūranga in Gisborne recently to stand in solidarity with them and with some members of the waka community. And for me personally, I had an interest to tautoko and observe what played out in Tūranga, having in mind that the intention was for the Endeavour to be arriving in Te Whanganui Atara at the end of November, on the 30th of November, and to think about what might I need to be aware of knowing that this was coming. The Endeavour will be accompanied by a flotilla. There are other waka that are travelling with the Endeavour, 2 waka haurua, a waka from Tahiti, 2 other tall European-style ships, and they intend to be in Wellington Harbour for a few days, I believe. What I wanted to talk about was really the impacts of the ideology that was brought by the Endeavour. And specifically to think about that, what does that mean for us here as Aotearoa Raukawa Tō? What does that mean for us here in Otaki, in Waikanai, down in Porirua? What does the coming of a replica of the Endeavour and the ideology that brought mean for us? And it's really quite timely for me to be thinking about that. We've recently concluded the hearing of Aotearoa ki whakarongo-tai's grievances in the Waitangi Tribunal inquiry into our district, and so I had the privilege of sitting and listening to many kōrero from our whānau talk about what the impact of that ideology has been for them and their whānau. Just wondering if you can help Kara with the slides here. I also just want to acknowledge Tina Ngata. Before I get into the kōrero for us locally, I'm just going to try and really quickly run through some of what's come to light really for me through her writing, and to set in place some of the framing or the facts of what the Endeavour brought here, what happened when Cook and his men arrived here. And it was Tina Ngata's writing around the Doctrine of Discovery that kind of enlightened me on this kaupapa. And so the Doctrine of Discovery is really a key set of beliefs, principles, laws and regulation that gave the British and other European monarchies the assumed right to come and conquer, claim rights to land, and I started to look at Tina's writing around what was this doctrine of discovery all about. And as I came to understand the doctrine of discovery, it's helped me to anticipate, to expose, and to resist some of the actions and behaviours that are informed by this doctrine. So, what is the doctrine of discovery? It's a number of Catholic laws, and there's some images of them up there, called papal bulls. They originated in the Vatican in the 15th and 16th century, and the laws set out guidance and legal rights for European monarchies. They essentially provided a framework for explorers to lay claim to territories in the name of their king or queen if it was uninhabited by Christians. So if no Christians were living there, they were considered vacant lands that could be defined as discovered and sovereignty claimed. And it really established the idea that if a place isn't occupied by someone like you, then you can consider your rights as being superior to theirs. Another key idea it established was that Indigenous peoples were considered non-human and therefore not entitled to human rights, and an idea that went even further than that, which was that the presence of Indigenous people on land can just be flat out denied. So the doctrine itself asserts that land which was discovered can in fact be considered empty, or terra nullius was the term. And I think a lot of people are familiar with this term that's been applied by Hobson in Te Waiponamu, was applied in Te Whenua Moemoeā in Australia, the idea that there was nothing or nobody living there. And it was those ideas that informed Cook in his thinking and his actions when he arrived here. When he arrived in Aotearoa, he raised the British flag in Whitianga and Te Waiponamu, claiming new land for Mother England, and he laid claim to Aotearoa on behalf of King George III without any consent from the people living here. I don't want to spend too much time on exactly what Cook and his men did, but I think given the tendency of the Tuia 250 campaign to mislead the public about the reality of what happened, they've referred to things that happened when Cook arrived as mere encounters. I think it is important just to make sure we're all clear about the facts of things that happened when Cook arrived. And again, I just want to mihi te whaia Robin Kahukiwa for her images, which really, I think, capture this kōrero quite well. There's this powerful image about Cook that's been built up, that he was this honourable explorer, and so just to sort of counter that view of him, we see this idea of native rights being lesser than colonial rights in the names that he decided he was entitled to give various places around Aotearoa. We see accounts in his own journals which detail him stealing from Indigenous communities when he came across their unattended homes. But of course, when Māori stole from him and his men, they were shot, killed, abducted, tortured, and there wasn't really much thought for the fact that these were the people that were arriving uninvited, invading our land. There was a sense of a superior right on the part of Cook and his men. Looking at his journals, you can see more of this sort of disrespect for native people's humanity. He details the murder of unarmed Indigenous people simply because he wanted to check out the vessel that they were sailing. Cook and his crew were responsible for the introduction of sexually transmitted diseases in many Pacific nations. Cook himself had syphilis, and this wasn't an unintended consequence, but after about a decade of successive trips around the Pacific, him and his men were fully aware of what would happen to the local people there once they arrived. And the impacts of the sexual activity of the Endeavour and its men were not just limited to disease, but crew members' accounts tell of sexual encounters with children as young as 9 years old. And so I think I'll leave that there, but just to say, if that's something you're interested in learning more about what did happen in Aotearoa, Tina's book that's just been released has a really good compilation of her writing on this. So what does that all mean for us here in Otaki, for Te Atiawa, Ngāti Raukawa, and Ngāti Toa? I really want to respond to the idea that those were different times. That was then, this is now. And I want to talk about some examples that I've seen in my life and in my work of this underlying ideology of the doctrine of discovery, and where it's evident in our stories, in our experience as Te Atiawa, Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Toa. So I'm going to start probably where I should, with Te Kākākura. He's depicted no less than 3 times in the corner here, rangatira of Ngāti Toa and Te Atiawa, known to many as Wi Parata, and he's known for an infamous court case in New Zealand's legal history, Wi Parata versus the Bishop of Wellington. So this is one of my tupuna, and he took the Bishop of Wellington, Octavius Hadfield, to the Supreme Court over a breach of contract between the Anglican Church and Ngāti Toa. Ngāti Toa had provided land to the church, and in exchange for the promise that a school for young Ngāti Toa people would be built by the church. They never ceded this land to the church, but offered it as a gift for that purpose. However, no school was built, and in 1850 the church obtained a crown grant to the land without the consent of the iwi. Chief Justice Prendergast ruled in that case that the Treaty of Waitangi was a simple nullity, having been signed by primitive barbarians, and that's quite an infamous finding that took a long time to overturn in Aotearoa. Having had a bit of a closer look at what Prendergast said and what the basis for that finding was, he actually applied this doctrine of discovery and that thinking in the finding. He applied a framework that assumed that the land at Whitireia, inhabited by Ngāti Toa, was essentially terra nullius, and relied upon a precedent case from the USA which specifically invoked the doctrine of discovery. The recently retired Chief Justice Sean Elias referred to this by saying, "The approach that Māori property had no existence in law until converted into land held in fee of the Crown was in essence a belief that Ngāti Toa's rights at Whitireia did not exist. In fact, there was a refusal to recognise our existence as Ngāti Toa and Whitireia, and essentially that the land was never ours to give." I also just want to be a bit cheeky and take the opportunity to mention that the land that we're on right now was gifted to the Church Bishop Society, and that's evolved into the Anglican Church of New Zealand and is still owned by them. And it includes rangiatea, that includes our kura as well. So nationally, this was really significant from a legal perspective because it essentially embedded this concept of terra nullius into our legal framework in Aotearoa, this refusal to recognise our existence on the land, and this continued to play out. Again, this isn't something that's isolated back into the time of Te Kākākura. So I'm going to speak a little more personally now around how this idea has played out for our whānau here in Otaki and Waikanae, and talk about the confiscation of homesteads in Aotearoa. So if we fast forward 2 generations, Wi Parata's granddaughter, Haua Kiriona, married a man, Mr. Martinga Baker from Otaki, and are my great-grandparents. They lived together in this homestead at Makura Tāwhiti on Mill Road, just a few houses down from Laukawa Marae, next door to Uncle Pirate Rikihana, and this land was gifted to Martinga's mother by his wife Auntie Rakete. And several of our kaumātua were born in this house, including my own grandfather. In 1962, applications were made by the Otaki Borough Council for charging orders for rates in respect to 11 land blocks, many of these our homesteads on Mill Road. The Otaki Borough Council had a position that councils should have the power to sell land when rates were not paid, which is what happened across a number of our whānau papakainga with the utilisation of the Rating Act in the 1960s. So in the case of our whānau homestead, In 1963, the valuation department had inspected blocks and they had noted they were vacant with the exception of derelict cottages situated on 3 land blocks. That contradicted what a recent district officer statement had set out, which is that at least one of the houses had been occupied for many years. The town clerk at the time acknowledged that most of the owners of these blocks weren't known to them and therefore could not be advised of rates owed or the intent to sell this land. And so the land was vested with the Māori trustee for sale. The town clerk actually noted that he'd recently written to Martinga Baker to advise that a dilapidated shed on the property was a distinct danger to children from neighbouring houses, but no reply had been received. Martinga had previously had rates notices served on him, but he had never made contact and he owed £75 or $150 in rates. I was recently listening to a recording of my grandfather speaking about why his father believed he should not have to pay those rates, and he was quite exacerbated, saying, why should we pay the council for anything? What were they doing for us at the time? Nothing. And that he understood that, Martinga understood that the rationale for payment of rates, the kōrero that was going on in Otaki Township at the time, was to provide land blocks with water. But it was also his position that the Crown or Council did not have the right to manage or govern the rights to water, and there were none of those services being provided to these homes at the time. However, in 1964, our papakainga had been sold and alienated from us, and it was mysteriously burnt down not long after. And I also listened to my koro talking about his devastation coming up from Wellington to see his whānau home burned. Similar compulsory alienation of land and homesteads was also occurring at Waikanai at the time. Hoa was a benefactor of land around the gate of Whakarongo Marae, gifted to her so that her whānau might still have land in the area by Tohuroa Parata. And this land was also vested with the Māori trustee for sale in 1964. The Māori Affairs officials first claimed that they couldn't find the address of the owners to notify them of the vestment, and then coincidentally claimed they found the address in 1965 and notified the owner one day after the agreement to purchase it had been entered into with Horowhenua County Council. There were other homes in Waikanai that were successfully alienated in this way, and I want to make mention of Auntie Hariata Higgett, who very bravely told our tribunal in our hearings of her home being confiscated as a young girl because her nanny just couldn't afford to keep coming up to Otaki and paying rates that were increasing at a rate of about 200% a year at the time. And she described what it felt like to stand there holding her uncle's hand as a young girl, watching her home being burnt down by the Waikanai Fire Brigade for one of their training exercises. And so these are some of the examples that come to mind of this ideology which refuses to acknowledge the existence of Māori residents on their lands and creates a feeling of entitlement on the part of Crown agents to take whatever resources they please. My koro talked about our land block reached from Wairinga Road right through Mill Road to the stream and was taken for non-payment, that full block, for £75 of non-paid rates. The last example I wanted to speak about was Kāriwariwa Urupā, which has been in existence since at least the time when Auntie Gabriel refers to it as the K word, so I know I probably don't need to say any more about what happened in 1839 in this area in Waikanai. The Urupā is the site of the burial of Mita Periwai Punahau, mother of Wiparata, and she's also in our whare. And Kahe Te Rawa Te Rangi, the woman who infamously swam from Kapiti Island to the mainland to warn Ngāti Toa that they needed to come and defend the motu. In about 2014, I just returned home from being overseas, and one of my first jobs was to write a cultural impact assessment in response to a proposal to develop this site. I knew the site was an Urupā, and through the course of investigating the history of the site, I was to learn that the Waikanai Land Company had actually successfully initiated development of half of the site in the 1950s. And again, they were able to achieve this through the sale of the land by the Māori trustee, lobbying the council to lift the cemetery status, so that's a map from the 1960s, with cemetery designation over the land. They successfully had that lifted. At the time they wanted to construct a marina in this area. I won't go into the specifics of the works that were undertaken in the Urupa, other than to say that the Urupa and many koiwi within it were destroyed with the permission of the Manawatu Catchment Board and Horowhenua County Council. And again, these were recent acts. This started in the 50s, and the most recent desecration of a gravesite was in 2000, and a test pit to attempt further development was dug in 2016. So the developer continues today with their plans for development of this site, and we have no assurance from Heritage New Zealand or the District Council that they'll be able to prevent this from happening any further. And so I just want to reflect on what it means to the people of Te Aotearoa to have the koiwi of rangatira, such as Kahi Te Rawa Te Rangi and Me Tāpere Wai Punahau, disturbed and denigrated in this way. They were so critical to the history of Aotearoa and Ngāti Toa, celebrated as symbols of mana whenua. I often think about there would be no Wiparata without Me Tāpere Wai Punahau. There would be no Maui Pomare without his grandmother, Kahi Te Rawa Te Rangi. These were the mothers of our sovereign nation of Te Aotearoa ki whakarongotai. The things that have transpired at Kārewerewa Urupa send a signal to us that it doesn't matter who you are, what you've achieved, what you signify to a whole society of people. Because in this country, if you're Māori, you sit with the knowledge that you are never safe, even in what should be your time of eternal rest. And we have to sit with that knowledge that we have little to protect us from things like this happening. It really can be quite exhausting to have to be hyper-vigilant to these sorts of things. And so this is another example of this ideology that our rights, our humanity, our existence are not recognised and are subject to the whim of Crown and local government powers. The best way I can really summarise how this ideology of terra nullius and the doctrine of discovery manifests itself today is I think back to what it was like sitting with the developer that I had to meet with when he wanted to talk to me about the proposals to further develop this site, explaining he had a map and he'd had his archaeologist do a radar survey of the whenua, and there were red dots in it, and he pointed to these and said, from our survey this tells us that these are anomalies, and that if it's true that there are human remains here, this indicates where they might be. And he wasn't saying they were anomalies in the way that they were exceptional women, exceptional people. They were anomalies to him because in that mindset he was perpetuating, the recognition of Māori bodies in our whenua gave him cause to have to deviate from this colonial ideology that our rights, our stories, our bodies were not considered to exist in the land. He referred to my tupuna as an anomaly. And so I go back now to what I observed in Tūranga, where the crew of the Endeavour, after arriving in Tūranga, were taken to dine for a lunch at a site called Wairinga-a-Hika, which is where some of my friends from that area, their tupuna, were executed. They were captured and sent to Wharekodi, and their bones were still laying in the ground. And that was the site that Tuia 250 felt was appropriate to go and hold a luncheon afterwards. And it's this, for me, that's the same ideology to not recognise our presence in the whenua, to think of this land as that terra nullius still. So for me personally, the Endeavour is a vehicle that brought these ideologies to this land, and I feel offended that we should be subjected to seeing it, and the ideology it reflects paraded around in a celebration. In a way, I really see the decision to engage with the Endeavour as somewhat of a litmus test for Māori leadership. the ability to see, expose, resist, dismantle colonial ideology, this is a core competency required for Māori who want to work in the interests of our people. And many of our students here is what they're learning to do. For example, our kaitiakitanga students might look at the idea that Māori have no pre-existing rights to water as that colonial ideology. Or our Toi Ora Whānau students might look at the idea that the state is a better parent, the wider whānau are not fit to parent children. Our tikanga students might look at the idea that the judicial system, where the Crown law and legal processes have more authority than tikanga Māori and tikanga Māori processes, as that ideology. And so this is also particularly important for our current political leadership to consider, because it is them who are sitting in the seats that have to respond to this. That's their job to respond to this. And I think, how can we trust our political leadership to resist and reject these ideologies when they're thrown at us by the Crown, often in a more covert way, if they can't even reject it when it's as blatant as the Endeavour itself coming into our waters? And so I think of those leaders that walked onto the Endeavour, that went to receive the Endeavour, and I have those questions about them. The last acknowledgement I want to make is just to the tūpuna in this whare. I've talked about very few, but I have a strong suspicion that every single individual tūpuna has their own similar story of encountering this, of resisting this, and surviving this. And so I also think back to the words of Te Kaka Kura, whakarungu ki ngā kupu o ngā kaumātua, kakahutia I rungi i a koe hei whatu ki te ao hau. To carry and learn the stories of your tūpuna, reflect on them, and then share them with others. No reira. Huri no te whare nei, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora no Mahina-a-rangi, thank you very much for that. I felt a bit guilty there. On the 8th of October 1969, and you're going to figure out how old I am from this, that you might be able to acquire a copy of the Royal Welcome to Queen Elizabeth in 1969 on Rugby Park in Gisborne, and he's a skinny 16-year-old who leads the combined schools haka party. Guilty? Our next speaker is Emalani Case, and she's a lecturer in Pacific Studies at Victoria University of Wellington. As a Kanaka Māori, a woman, activist, writer and dancer, she is deeply engaged in issues of Indigenous rights and representation, dietary colonialism and environmental and social justice. Her current research focuses on Hawaiian articulations of identity and nationalism, sovereignty and decolonising Indigenous minds and bodies. She is from Waimea, Hawaii. Hara mai te tuahine.
Aloha mai kākou. Kala mai ko'u leo, he pu'u e ha ko'u. Mamua o ka ho'omaka ana I ke ia hai o lelo, make wau e hapai I ke kahi leo mahalo I ke ia hale, I nā kūpuna, I loko o ke ia hale. Make wau e mahalo I nā kānaka o ke ia aina no ka hiki ana iau ke kuma ana I make ano he malihini no Hawaii. Make wau e mahalo I nā wahine e noho nei I hope o'u. No ke kono ana iau e hele mai ka ana I ke kahi mau mana'o. O waino ho'i ke ia, o wa'o Emalani Case, no Hawaii mai au. No ka aina o Waimea, aloha. Aloha, my name is Emalani Case, and I just want to apologize for my voice. I'm a bit croaky today. And I just wanted to say thank you for having me and for allowing me to be here and for the invitation to come and share. And before I start, I wanted to also acknowledge Tina Ngata. Her name has been raised a few times, and she was the first one who kind of asked me to get into this space and to share some things about, I'm gonna use this instead because my voice is a bit yuck and I need to get the mic closer. But I wanted to thank Tina, as I said earlier, because she, invited me to share about Cook, about my reflections on Tuia 250, and she's also been really instrumental in teaching me about the Doctrine of Discovery and helping to get me to think more critically about it and about the ways that it continues to manifest today. So I thought, because Cook is at the center of Tuia 250, rather than starting by talking about his life, let's start by talking about his death. So this is a depiction of Captain Cook's death done by John Weber. And some people say that this is Cook saying, "No, stop shooting," to the guys on the boat. And other people say this is him saying, "Hey, come pick me up." I'm going to go with the second interpretation because I think that's what he's doing. Cook to me is a coward and a murderer and an invader and a conqueror. So I'm going to imagine, because we don't know, right? So I'm just going to imagine that's what he was doing. Say, "Hey, come get me, I'm in trouble." But Cook died on the 14th of November, 1779 in Kealakekua Bay on the island of Hawaii after he had tried to kidnap one of our highest ranking chiefs, Colonial Pu'u, after there was a bit of a skirmish about a stolen boat. So you just don't do that, right? You just don't come into somebody else's land and try to kidnap someone. His actions were not pono. They were not right. They were not righteous. The people there saw that. And so he was clubbed to death and killed. And I've talked about this before in other contexts because, and don't mind my kind of wicked smile, but what happened to Captain Cook after he died is quite symbolic to me. And I use his death and dismemberment, because he was dismembered, as a metaphor for stripping colonialism down, right? In order to understand the way that colonialism works, we actually have to recognize it. We have to know what we're looking for. We have to see it. We have to know it. That's the only way that we're going to be able to show other people how it's working and then encourage other people to resist colonial enterprises and colonial events like Tuia 250 with us. So I've talked about this before, but my whole metaphor for colonialism is strip it down to the bone. Follow the example of my kupuna who stripped Cook down to his bones. So when he was killed, my people actually burnt his flesh. I'm gonna get a tiny bit graphic. They burnt his flesh and they stripped him down to his bones. And then they gave parts of him back to his crew, but not everything, just some. And then his crew said, "Oh, no, we want more." So they brought back more bones, but they didn't give everything back. They were quite selective. So they said, "Okay, you can have this, but we're gonna keep parts of him." Now that's quite symbolic because that's a great example of indigenous agency there, saying, "You asked for the bones, but he disrespected us, and we're gonna keep some of that. We'll give you some." And then after that, according to records, his bones were put into a coffin, the bones that his crew had, and sunk into the bay at Kealakekua. So in a way, if you want to look at this symbolically and metaphorically, that is what we have to do with Cook and with colonialism. Strip it down, see it, expose all of the insidious logics at work in things like Tuia 250, and be in control of it. Yeah? Like we were in control of giving his crew back the bones we wanted to give them, not all of it. So for me, Cook doesn't have to be a symbol of colonialism. You know, colonizers need their heroes, and Cook is their hero for some reason. You know, like Columbus, they need these symbols, these guys that came out led by things like the Doctrine of Discovery, coming to conquer other lands and other peoples under the assumption that anybody who was not Christian and that was not white was less than human. So colonizers got to paint these guys as being the, you know, explorers, the discoverers, and strategically erase the dirty history of their lives so that they can continue to use them as these colonial heroes fixed in time. But if we look at his death and dismemberment, I think we can actually use Cook as a symbol of our hopeful and continued resistance to colonialism. Yeah, so I tend to focus on his dismemberment afterwards for that. But in order to do that, we have to see it, we have to recognize it, we have to know it. We have to know how colonialism works. So what I wanted to do today, and I'm going to bring a little bit of Hawaii in here, is I wanted to identify some colonial logics, some colonial reasonings at work in both Tuia 250 and the issue happening at home at my mountain of Mauna Kea. And the reason I'm doing this is because it's very easy, and I've been accused of this, it's very easy for people to look at some of the things that we say about Tuia 250 and have them say, oh, you're just overreacting, Emalani. Like, that's not really what's happening. You're reading too much into it. So I'm going to bring Mauna Kea in so that I can put these two, Tuia 250 and Mauna Kea, side by side, so you can see the same colonial logics working in both. These are not isolated things, these are patterns. Yeah, so we have to be able to identify those patterns. And you might think a mountain and Tuia 250, totally different contexts. Yes, same logics at work. Just in case you didn't know, this is Mauna Kea. And this is the mountain that my people are fighting to protect at home. And if you don't know about Mauna Kea, we are trying to prevent the construction of a 30-meter telescope on the summit of this mountain. When we talk about tupuna, this is my tupuna. This is my ancestor. So it's like building something on the body of my ancestor. So it's the ultimate desecration. It's the ultimate disrespect. It's also dangerous to the environment and to the ecosystem up there. Mauna Kea sits on top of our water aquifer. That's what cleans our water. That's where we get fresh water from. And they want to build a 30-meter telescope on the top. So that's just, if you didn't know about the issue, that's what we're fighting against. So I'm going to touch on a few things, and I know this might be quite controversial, but I'm going to look at the strategic use of culture in both Tuia 250 and Mauna Kea. And yes, I am going to talk about waka, or what we call va'a in Hawaii, and I'm not at all trying to comment on people who are involved with the flotilla. That's not my place, and that's not my intent. What I do want to do is look at the way that colonial governments strategically take pieces of culture, just the stuff that they deem as being acceptable, and use it to their advantage. So this comes straight from the Tuia 250 website. You see the imagery there, you have a paddle, and they're saying we're weaving people together for a shared future. Here's this idea that you can bring these two histories together seamlessly and harmoniously. Now, Mahina-a-rangi mentioned the flotilla with the 3 ships and the 3 waka. One of them is from Tahiti, on the top on that side. And there's this idea that if you put all of these ships and waka together, that we're sharing this space of maritime history, that we all sailed here, right? So we're all in this together. Just last week, I was at Wellington Museum where this guy was proposing an exhibition at the museum, and he was like, I really want to celebrate Wellington as a city of migrants, because we're all migrants, even the Maori. And I was like, I'm not Maori, but come on. We're not all migrants. That's the same logic working here, right? We all came here on a boat. And that's the attempt of the colonizer to almost indigenize itself, right? To say, oh no, we're just like you, we just came after. But that's so problematic because it erases the place of the indigenous people. And the indigenous people have to have that place as First Peoples, right? So you have this strategic use of waka which symbolizes that. And I don't want to criticize people who do get involved, but what I will say is that in events like this, and even on Mauna Kea, they need Indigenous participation. Indigenous participation is what validates what they're doing, yeah? And we see it in Hawaii as well. This comes straight out of a 14-page plan that was written by the mayor of Hawaii Island. He's the mayor of my island, and he wrote this grand old plan called A Way Forward, which is not a way forward, but anyway, so he's also using waka culture. In Hawaii, we had a huge canoe renaissance that started in the 1970s with the construction of Hokule'a, our first double-hulled canoe, and the successful sailing of Hokule'a from Hawaii to Tahiti. And proponents of the 30-meter telescope have been using that culture to justify the building of this telescope, saying things like, your people have always been explorers, you've always used the stars, now here's another opportunity. We'll build this telescope on the top of your mountain so you can get closer to the stars. And they've actually, speaking about getting people involved and Indigenous participation, one of our main navigators in Hawaii, Kalepo Baba, I'm just going to say it, Kalepo Babayan. He's in the news. He's a very, very visible proponent of the TMT. But he's bought into this. He's bought into this. And the governor of Hawaii and the state of Hawaii needs that. They need him because he's become the good brown face. Everybody be like him. Be like Kalepa, he's the good Hawaiian. All of you guys protesting at the base of the mountain, bad Hawaiians that still need to be disciplined. Yeah. So this is the mayor of Hawaii, again, using Hokule'a, using our movement of renaissance, our movement of revival, our movement of regeneration, and saying, oh, this is an opportunity to continue your growth and your development, treating us like children. This is the first page of the plan. I actually read the whole thing, although I could have stopped after the first sentence, because he said this presentation is beyond a yes or no of the TMT. And in his unwillingness to say no to the TMT, that's a yes. Yeah. So to me, a way forward for the mountain that still allows for the TMT to be built is not a way forward. And it's just evidence that they're not listening to us. But again, waka or va'a culture being used differently, slightly differently, but still being used. Yeah, strategically. And the thing about the va'a culture or canoe culture in Hawaii that I've noticed is that the canoe has become a acceptable symbol of culture for the colonial state. Yeah, it's safe. The canoe is safe. So it's almost like this state-sanctioned cultural practice. It's not threatening to the colonial state. It's not threatening to the governor. So, or not threatening to the government. But if you try to be too Hawaiian and do things outside of the sphere of what the state has deemed acceptable, tale, aloha, then that's too much. Yeah, so you can build a waka, you can build a canoe, you can sail it, that's all good. But if you're gonna build, say, an ahu or an altar on the mountain to recognize and respect and honor your deities and your gods, that's too much. And just in June, 2 of our altars were taken down and dismantled on the Mauna. Yeah, because that's too Hawaiian. So as Hawaiians, as Indigenous beings, we're either only allowed to exist in this space that the state has created for us, be the good Hawaiians, sail your canoe, dance your hula at the hotel, but we're not allowed to be anything more. And when we are more, like we're being at the base of the mountain to protect it, then that's a threat. So anyway, all of this to say that we have to be mindful, I think, of the way that our culture is being hijacked in certain ways and used strategically. Tuia 250, as well as Mauna Kea, are also relying on this myth of reconciliation. This, again, comes straight from the Tuia 250 website and was mentioned earlier that this is a time for honest conversations about the past, What's so problematic about that, though, is that as long as these conversations are still, as long as the terms of these conversations are still being dictated by the colonial state, then that's not a space for honest conversations, right? An honest conversation would not have to happen on this 250-year anniversary of invasion. It would have been happening a long time ago. And real honest conversations would mean the colonial power actually relinquishing power and saying, you guys create the terms of these conversations. There can be no real reconciliation as long as colonialism is ongoing. And Tuia 250 is an example of that ongoing colonialism. Yeah, but they rely on these kinds of myths, trying to propose this idea that if we just come together and just talk about it, then we can say sorry, kiss and hug, and it'll all be okay, right? But that does not account at all for ongoing injustice. So I'm gonna switch back to Mauna Kea so that you can see the same logic at work. I was trying to highlight problematic phrases with the red boxes, but I could have just circled the entire thing. So again, this is Mayor Harry Kim and his vision for Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea should be a symbol of nations working together for the pursuit of peace and harmony, a beacon of hope and discovery. There's that word, discovery is so problematic because that means let's build a telescope. This is not just about science, it's about combining culture and science as if our culture is not already scientific. It is about respect and caring. No, it isn't. Because as long as they're still allowing for that telescope, they're not respecting anyone. It is about a quest for knowledge that will make us a better people, and this is the most insulting part, and better stewards of this world. I'm like, we're trying to teach you how to be stewards of the world, right? Because we're not allowing for desecration. We're not allowing for the destruction of our mountain. We're in a time where we have to be protecting the earth and not wasting time trying to conquer a new frontier. To me, that exploration of space is an extension of the doctrine of discovery. We've conquered everything and discovered everything. We're going to go up to space now to build our national ego. So further down, we've got, this is about a recognition of deeply painful history, a deeply painful history of intrusions. So Mayor Harry Kim, like the organizers of Tuia 250, proposed that this is time for us to come together and talk about what happened. Let's talk about the past. It's like President Bill Clinton's 1993 apology bill to the Hawaiian people for the wrongful overthrow and annexation of Hawaii. That's a slap in the face, because it was an apology that resulted in absolutely nothing. So use us as an example and know that these honest, so-called honest conversations aren't really going to result in anything. I would hope they would, but anyway. And then the last point, Mauna Kea should be an opportunity for the gift of aloha to be presented to the world. Now, why I find this so problematic is that as Hawaiians, we've been expected to give our aloha to everybody. Yeah, but our aloha is ours, and we're supposed to have the agency and the ability to decide who we give it to. And we're supposed to be welcoming. The state of Hawaii relies upon this idea that Hawaii is here for the taking, that people can come, they can stay, they can find their paradise, they can find their fantasy, and we, as Kanaka Maoli, are supposed to be welcoming of that. We're supposed to show the spirit of aloha. So that's insulting to me. And that is another hijacking of culture strategically. But they don't let us show our aloha for our mountain. So more colonial logics at work. I just thought I would look at the themes shaping Tuia Encounters 250. Again, you have that myth of a dual heritage, that everybody's even. One of the problems of that, there are many problems of that dual heritage and shared future, is that it assumes that Maori are just another ethnic group, just another minority. But you aren't. You're the indigenous people, and that deserves recognition. But as soon as people start to call you a minority or start to treat you just like another ethnic group here, then again, that allows for the colonizer to kind of come in and almost indigenize itself. You see this horrible wording of first meetings, encounters, this idea that it was peaceful, perhaps mutually beneficial for everyone. I highlighted this part about the arts and science because science has been used not only here, but in the case of Mauna Kea as well, to justify things. Because science is supposed to take priority over everything, right? We even see it in our classrooms. Where do we push our students to? Not the humanities, let's push them to the sciences, because it's more important. Oh yeah, and I mentioned this already earlier with the use of waka culture. So here we have initiatives of the vision for Mauna Kea. There you see science again. And what Mauna Kea, what the proponents of the TMT have done is that they've pitted culture against science, which allows them to say that we're backward, that we are anti-progress, anti-development. Yeah. We're anti-desecration. It's totally a different thing. Yeah? You can have the telescope, just don't build it on my mountain. That's all we're saying. The mayor also wants to build a major cultural center on the mountain, as if that makes it any better. I'm like, we don't want anything up there. You can have your own cultural center. But this is just showing how he's trying to give us crumbs. Go, take this. Be happy with this. We're going to give you something. We should never have to be satisfied with crumbs. We should never have to be satisfied with the state saying, this is where you can practice culture. Yeah? Because then we've already lost. Again, he wants Mauna Kea to be a beacon of hope for the world. And you know what? The stand at the base of Mauna Kea is already a beacon of hope for the world. What my people are doing over 100 days in to save this mountain is hopeful. That is what we should be looking at. We should be looking at people at Ihumātao who are trying to save that land. That is hopeful. That's where we need to go in the future. Right? Because we're in a crisis, we're in a climate crisis, our planet is suffering, so we should be looking to people who already have the indigenous knowledge and are acting upon that knowledge to save our planet and use that as hope. But of course, he wants us to be a model of how the people of the world can live together in harmony and the opportunity of Mauna Kea becoming a global beacon of hope, peace, and discovery. In other words, let's bring all the nations of the world to the top of the mountain to build this telescope, and we'll all be good. Yeah, the thing about this plan is that Mayor Harry Kim wrote it, I believe, under the assumption that we're not smart. Like, this plan is ridiculous. All 14 pages of it is ridiculous. And our people are becoming more and more educated and becoming more and more aware of the way these colonial logics work, that this doesn't work. Like, people read right through this, read that first sentence, said, this is ridiculous, this is rubbish, and then threw it away. These colonial logics may have been able to work decades ago, but they don't work anymore. Because we're learning more, we're able to read these things and recognize these things even more. So yeah, he's using recycled logics and rhetoric from like decades ago. You gotta get with the time. Here we see another stealing of aloha. Yeah. Anyway, so all of that is to say, to come back to the very beginning, that it is essential. I think it's essential that we recognize these colonial logics at work. We have to. And once you start to recognize them, you're going to see them everywhere. You're going to see colonialism everywhere. Eileen Morton Robinson wrote this amazing book about white possessions and how colonizers need to mark their possessions. They need to be visible. Yeah, so it's in every single flag. It's in every government building. It's in every street sign that honors a colonizer or a colonial narrative and not an indigenous one. It's everywhere. So something I do with my students at Victoria University is I have them look for it. I'm like, where are we? We're on this campus. Let's go outside or let's think about what's around us. How is colonialism being marked here? How is indigenous presence being used strategically? Or how is it being erased? Yeah, let's go and find it. Because once you start to see it, you can't turn that off. You can't unsee it. Yeah. I drive people crazy, my family crazy, because I see it everywhere and I try to identify it and they're like, can you just watch the movie, or can you just enjoy this and that, you know? But I'm like, no, because it's everywhere and it's insidious. Yeah, and we have to call it out. This is the only way we're ever going to change. So my whole mission with my students, my first year students, and I'm very open with it, I'm very open about this, is I'm like, I'm going to radicalize you. Maybe that's not what I was hired for, but that's okay. We're going to identify these things now. And I'm not going to wait until you graduate to then have these conversations with you. We need you now. We need you to be working with us now. Yeah? To be looking at what true peace, true harmony, true aloha is for the world. We need to be looking at why Indigenous people need to be respected, why Indigenous rights need to be respected. And I am more committed to that. I mean, I'm super committed to that at home in Hawaii, but I'm also very committed to that here because I'm not from here. Yeah, so I refuse, as I always say, I refuse to be part of the problem. And I don't want my students to be either. A lot of my students are Pacifica students, born and raised here, who know themselves as Pacific, but don't often think about what it means for them to be in somebody else's country, on somebody else's land. So yes, I think my second lecture of the try, I say, okay, let's think about it. What did it take for us to be here right now on this place, in this campus, on this place? And then we talk about all the streams running under Wellington City, all the water that's been culverted, the fact that we walk on water every day and they don't know about it. We talk about all of the colonial street signs, the fact that you have to walk down Lambton Key or onto Wakefield and then to Oriental and Cuba and Torrey, and those are all colonial names. So you're forced in giving directions to reinforce one narrative, you know? I don't do it to depress them. I do it so they wake up. Because basically, we have to, as I said in the beginning, strip colonialism down. We have to see it, we have to identify it, and expose it. So I say, let's use Cook as a representative of Tuia 250, as a representative of colonialism in general. And let's never allow him to exist whole. Let's strip him down to his bones and be selective about what we do with him and where we allow him to exist. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Mahalo.
Thank you, Emalani. At the risk of giving too much time to Captain Cook, Emalani's kōrero reminded me of a very good friend I have in Hawaii, Peter Hanohano. And he said to me, oh, you Māoris in New Zealand are useless. You let him go. And we had to finish him off when he came over here. The other thing to listening to Emalani is the alignment of Mauna Kea and what's happening at Tuia 250. And again, Peter once said that when the Pākehā look at us, they say, well, the Polynesian people have been separated by the Pacific Ocean. And Peter said, no, actually we're joined by the Pacific Ocean. And so it's really great to have you here, to reinforce that relationship that we have with our tuakana out in Te Whanganui. Our third and final speaker is my colleague here at Te Whanganui, Ani Mikaere. In 2016, she was awarded Te Kauritanga, a degree conferred by the founding iwi of Te Whanganui, and her thesis entitled Like Moths to the Flame, a history of Ngāti Raukawa resistance and recovery, investigates the impact of colonisation on Ngāti Raukawa thought, and was published in 2017. Other publications include He Rukuruku Whakaaro, Colonising Myths, Māori Realities, and The Balance Destroyed. When Ani was presented with her kauritanga, I had the opportunity to speak at her graduation, and I described her as a quiet revolutionary And I was one of her students when I first came here to Te Whanganui, and it's certainly, having spent 30 years working for the colonising government as a soldier, Ani totally changed the way that I see the world. Nō reira, te tuahine, Ani, haere mai.
Te tuakana, Emalani, ko rangatira mātou i tō tainga mai, tēnā koe. Tēnā hoki koutou, kua tai mai nei ki te wānanga i tēnei kaupapa. I tautoko anau i ngā mihi katoa kumihia. Now I've got the stopwatch going, so I'm going to just get on with it. Kia ora tātou, it's great to have you all here today. And I'm not sure whether there's really anything left to say that's going to be new, but I'll try. I thought I'd like to start by telling you all a story. Once upon a time, a man called James went to sea in a boat. He sailed to faraway lands and he did things that no white man had ever done before. One of the places he visited was called New Zealand, so named by another white man who had once been there. James sailed around New Zealand, having adventures and writing about what he did and saw. From time to time, he came across a few natives. Some of them were friendly, some of them were not. He got into a few scrapes along the way, but all in all, he had a marvellous time. When he eventually got home to England, he told the people there all about New Zealand, and it sounded so beautiful that many of them decided to come and make it their home. Like James, they found some of the natives a bit troublesome at first, but they worked things out and they settled down to live happily ever after. They never forgot their debt of gratitude to James, erecting monuments to him, teaching their children about his voyage of discovery, and celebrating his heroic achievements whenever a significant anniversary came around. Eventually, however, they were forced to confront the possibility that things were perhaps not quite so idyllic as they had liked to imagine. Some of the natives were openly rejecting the happy ever after scenario. It turned out that they had their own stories about James, stories that they had kept alive through the centuries, but which the white people didn't seem to know about. It turned out that they didn't regard James as a hero at all, nor did they see him as a master navigator. In fact, they had their own maritime traditions, their ancestors having sailed throughout the Pacific long before any white man ventured into this part of the world. In light of these revelations, and with the year 2019 fast approaching, the question of how to mark the 250th anniversary of James's voyage to New Zealand posed a bit of a dilemma. After a good deal of head-scratching, a solution was found. Instead of celebrating the event, the people would commemorate it. A replica of James's boat would reenact his journey around New Zealand, and the natives would be allowed to join in with their waka. The natives would be allocated space to tell their stories about James, their stories about the navigational feats of their own ancestors. Everyone would be encouraged to tell their stories and to listen to the stories of others, to acknowledge differences while seeking out commonalities, to celebrate diversity while finding a way to move forward together. Their consciences appeased and their grip on power undisturbed, James's people could get back to the important business of living happily ever after. Now that, as far as I can tell, is the story of Tuia 250. It's described, as I think we've already heard, as a commemorative program of experiences for encouraging honest conversations about the past, the present, and about how we navigate our shared future together. Despite its laudable aim of encouraging honest conversations, however, there is an unmistakable odour, some might say stench, of dishonesty pervading the entire initiative. The greatest single problem with Tuia 250 is the way that it purposely sets out to decontextualise Cook's voyage, encouraging us to see it as an isolated event, a story about a man in a boat, as opposed to understanding it as just another chapter in the shameful narrative of European imperialism. The modern era of European imperialism is usually accepted as beginning in 1492, which of course is the year when Columbus discovered America, thereby unleashing a fiercely contested imperial competition to plunder the earth for profit. This was a competition that lasted for several centuries, openly sanctioned by the church. You saw the papal bulls being flipped up on the screen earlier, and fuelled by apparently limitless colonial ambition. It was overtly racist, characterising tangata whenua all over the world as less than human, as others before me have talked about. According to Sophie Bessie, the Europeans' self-election as full human beings gave them a free hand to pillage everyone else. What followed then was a period of unparalleled economic exploitation, which within a few centuries made Europe the richest area of the planet. Now, Britain, you might be surprised to hear, was a relative latecomer to the competition, initially watching on with envy as Spain and Portugal made all the running. But by 1769, Britain was on the cusp of becoming the dominant player. Over the next 100 years or so, the population of the British Empire grew from under 12 million to over 285 million. It's like 24 times or something. I'm not very good at maths. In 1877, a man named Cecil Rhodes famously observed, "It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steadily before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honourable race the world possesses." Britain may have been a slow starter, but pretty quickly made up for lost time. By the turn of the 20th century, the British Empire covered nearly 1/4 of the world's landed area. Now, I tell you all of that because that's the background context, right? And it's actually a nonsense to view Cook's 1769 voyage in isolation from the colonising context within which it occurred. Cook didn't just get here by accident, and his intentions were never benign. He came with the explicit purpose of adding Aotearoa to Britain's colonial spoils. So we shouldn't be surprised that his crew shot and killed Māori without any pretence of justification. In one instance, by Cook's own admission, simply to impress upon them that the British were superior. Such deaths were most certainly not the unintended but tragic consequences of Cook's visit, as Jenny Shipley recently and disingenuously suggested. Such killings were part and parcel of the everyday dirty business of colonisation. The pattern of random killings was repeated over and over again as Cook went on what Tina Ngata has so beautifully described as his crime spree around Aotearoa. And I think you've seen this put up on the screen. This is Tina Ngata's book. If you haven't read it, get a hold of it. It's a great read. Nor does it make any sense to try and distance Tuia 250 from the colonial project which has spawned it. The colonial project which Tuia 250 in turn reinforces and perpetuates. Changing the operative word from celebration to commemoration, as though semantics can somehow magically transform Tuia 250 into something other than an endorsement of imperialism. This kind of thing doesn't fool anyone. Now, all of this raises an important question. Why have the architects of Tuia 250 sought so determinedly to disconnect the commemorations and Cook's 1769 voyage from the overarching project of British imperialism? I think part of it is straight squeamishness. Who would willingly admit to being the beneficiary of such overt and unapologetic greed, violence, and racism? It's so much easier to fall back on statements of regret about the misunderstandings of certain deeds, the misunderstandings of certain individuals who just did bad things, but they were limited to them and they just didn't quite understand what was going on. So much easier to blame it on that than to acknowledge that those individuals were actually engaged in laying the foundations of Pākehā privilege upon which the edifice of the colonial state has been erected and has thrived. But treating Cook's exploits in isolation from the broader context of British imperialism has even more important implications for the present and the future than it does for the past. This is because it's what enables the Tuia 250's conversation to neatly avoid the issue of colonial power, who it privileges, who it marginalises, and what should be done about it. Erasing the issue of power from the conversation is a conjuring trick that makes the most absurd propositions suddenly somehow seem plausible. Removing the issue of power from view can almost make it seem reasonable to propose that we're all in this together, that balance can somehow be restored to the relationship between Māori and Pākehā simply by ensuring that Māori stories are included in the celebrations. That the wounds of the past can be healed if we can just learn to listen respectfully to one another. That as fellow voyagers to this land, Māori and Pākehā share a common bond. Now, if you think that this nauseating narrative will end once Tuia 250 is done and dusted, think again. I've been recently looking at a document called Shaping a Stronger Education System with New Zealanders. It's a discussion document released by the government that aims to set down an enduring and inclusive vision for education. And one of its leading statements is that we are descendants of explorers, discoverers, and innovators who used their knowledge to traverse distant horizons. Well, some of us are. And some of us are the descendants of latecomers, dispossessors, and oppressors. Now, I actually really can understand why, after over 2 centuries of having Cook rammed down our throats as the hero who discovered us, some of us might be incredibly relieved to find that there's a place for our version of events to be told. I get that. I can appreciate the attraction of being provided with the opportunity to showcase the extraordinary maritime feats of our tūpuna. I can even accept that after centuries of being told that we are worthless, Pākehā approval really matters to some of us. I'm not passing judgment on our own people who believe that something is better than nothing. Far greater minds than my own have explored the phenomenon of colonisation and have produced searingly insightful analyses of the forces that propel us into settling for less than what we know in our hearts to be right. But nevertheless, I urge us to think extremely carefully about what it costs us to participate in a feel-good exercise that cynically refuses to grapple with the central issue of power, thereby vindicating Pākehā amnesia about their unsavoury past. When co-chair of the Tuia 250 committee, Jenny Shipley, feels justified in asserting that it's actually unnecessary for us to argue about who is right and who is wrong, because there's no single truth here, adding for good measure the colonising cliche that we all just need to find a way to move on. She said this less than a month ago. When she thinks it's okay to say things like that, that pretty much to me sums up everything that is wrong with Tuia 250. She's right about one thing. There's no need for us to argue about who is right and who is wrong, because that's beyond dispute. Killing people simply to show that you can, that's wrong. Stealing their possessions and then shooting them when they take something of yours, simply because you've decided that they're not fully human, that's wrong. Stealing our country purely because we're brown and we don't count, that's wrong. And just note, by the way, that if Cook had found other white people had beaten him to it, he would have sailed right on by, because white people's property rights had to be respected. Now, that all of these things happened is beyond dispute. The killings, the stealing, the pilfering, the piracy, the spreading of pestilential diseases, these are all beyond dispute. That, Jenny Shipley, is the single truth. As for moving on, well, I will move on happily as soon as the coloniser moves on from being a coloniser. Instead of Māori and Pākehā telling stories to one another about a safely distant past, let's sit down and have an honest discussion about the future of power in Aotearoa. Let's take up Matike Mai's recommendation and initiate a discussion with the Crown about achieving the goal of constitutional transformation by the year 2040. Let's talk about what that might look like. Let's figure out what we need to do to get there. Let's talk with Pākehā about how they can support the process. And finally, let's not underestimate the power that we have. There's a reason, as Emalani spoke about, there's a reason why so much energy has gone into cajoling us into participating in Tuia 250. The maintenance of colonial privilege is heavily reliant on our legitimising it through our words and our actions. Let's be clear that refusing to participate is not the same thing as doing nothing. Refusal is powerful. Should we refuse? Well, reenacting the voyage of the Endeavour, knowing what it symbolises to us, that's the ultimate display of colonising arrogance. Cecil Rhodes would be so proud. In the face of an initiative that seems so crassly calculated to cause offence and hurt, an initiative that demands our acquiescence as a way of demonstrating colonial dominance in the here and now, it seems to me that refusal is the very least that we should do. Nō reira, koe nā nui ho tāku, kia ora tātou.
We do have time for a couple of questions. Remember, there will be an opportunity to catch up with our kai kōrero ki wahora. So we have a couple of microphones running around back here. And so he pātau no tā koutou, just to refresh your memories. We had Mahina-a-rangi talking about what does it mean for us, what are some of those actions of colonisation that impacted directly on us here in Otaki and Waikanai, and things that are still going on today. As examples of that terra nullis. I forgot I'm new to wearing glasses. The confiscation of their whare, their homes, their papakainga. Okay? And we had our Tuia here talking about, hey, stripping it to the bone, I love it. Strip it to the bone and be selective about what you give back. Anything to do with colonisation, strip it to the bone. Have a good look at it, analyse it and decide what you want to give back and what you want to share. Yeah? And like Ohio, I had some pretty amazing kaiako and ahunga tikanga, and we did talk about the co-opting of our tikanga to try to legitimise the colonisers' behaviour and how they hijack our culture. Yeah? So there's heaps of ngako to take from those kōrero. So are there any pātai? Pātai a koutou? Have a think about it. We will have time to catch up afterwards and have a bit of a kōrero. We'll just quickly one here.
Kia ora koutou. So the sister Emalani, Did they know that they were eating Cook?
Did they know that they were eating Cook?
We didn't actually eat him. Yeah, I've not found, like, I think it's, some people say we did, and some people think we may have, but I haven't found any record of us actually eating him. It just talks about, all the records that I've seen talk about him being killed and then his flesh being burnt to get down to the bones. So, yeah, you can imagine we ate him maybe. I just kind of think his body might have been kind of gross and infected, so. Yeah, syphilis, you know, and may not have wanted that. But yeah, but I still have friends and family today who would like to imagine that we did. Yeah.
It's to make. The first one is thank you so much for your guys' kōrero. It was just absolutely inspirational. I have a couple of comments. The first one is, you know, in history it shows that when people are oppressed, and it happens generation upon generation, you get to a point where you end up revolting. I wondered if that could be a possibility for Aotearoa and Pacific in the future. The second thing I want to comment about, and I'm excited about, is constitutional transformation. What does that look like? And as individuals, how can we contribute to that big picture? Because that's really important for our mokos. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So just to respond to actually both your points, you said is revolution possible in the future? I'm an optimist, so I hope so. I'm going to say yes. In terms of constitutional transformation, a few years ago now, Matakiamai produced their report, which talks about constitutional transformation and what it might look like, and suggests the goal of 2040. Suggests some models. I guess probably and I don't really want to talk about it because the man who wrote the report is sitting in our midst, which is, I might get something wrong, but I guess one of the main, or one of the important thrusts of that report that I took from it was that any future constitutional arrangement, we need to have a rangatiratanga sphere, which is that's the sphere that we control. We have a kawanatanga sphere, so the government sits in its own area and controls stuff for other people, not Māori, and then we have a relational sphere, which is where the rangatiratanga and kawanatanga have to come together within the terms of Te Treaty to work out matters of common concern. But as I say, if you want to talk about that, you should probably badger moana when we have the cup of tea afterwards. The report, we'll try and find the website where you can actually find access to the report. There's loads of stuff in there. Kia ora.
Kia ora whai, Helen. Thank you for your pātai. I didn't realise you were a revolutionary. That's awesome. I was just sort of thinking, as Annie was talking, that I think to actually get to the table of making constitutional reform, to get to the point to revolt, there's a process around finding, sitting with, and speaking about the truth. And I think that applies both for Māori and both for Pākehā, because I find it, I have to say, much easier to talk about colonisation and resisting it and what's happened to our people when I talk about it generally as a national experience. But to have to talk about my own papa kāinga and the things that are in the whenua being taken, when I have to talk about desecration of bodies that I whakapapa from, it's actually taken me a few years to be able to do that, and to be well enough to sit with that. And there's skills and practices that we unfortunately need to enable us to find, sit with and speak to those truths. And so for people that struggle with that and don't want to engage with that, I have aroha for them, because it's not easy. And I had the same thought listening to Emalani talk about, discovery. The irony of that to me, in that our natural spaces, our maunga, our awa, those are the places I go to feel oneness, to look within myself. And I think it's very ironic that there's this need to look everywhere else, to look as far away as possible and not actually look within, not discover your own history and story as a visitor or as a recent arrival. And so I think there's a wide range of skills that we need to get to that point. And I need to just do a little plug, I'm sorry, that if you're interested in these kōrero, to find Kia Mau on Facebook, find Resist 250, Resist Cook, and get your hands on this book and come to terms with the kōrero that's in there. I have only 8 copies with me. They're the last 8. But you should have info about how to order that book as well. Yeah, keep it up.
Right. Last one.
Tēnā koutou.
I actually have a question about what we're going to do, whether we want to stop the Endeavour replica from coming into Te Whanganui. But I've just gone live because our system broke down, and my cousin Tina Ngata has asked me to ask about the environmental impacts. We've got a lot of people talking about climate change, and but we need to be able to link the Doctrine of Discovery to impacts.
Oh, kia ora Tina, yeah, thank you for that little prompt. As someone who's been a little active in the mainstream climate change movement, and there's this perpetual challenge in getting Māori involved in the mainstream movement, and it's a frustration that's held by Māori sometimes, but mainly held by Pākehā New Zealanders. And where I've got to on that is that climate change is not the banner that our people rise to, that climate change is actually just a symptom of the same ideology, the entitlement to resources. And so the banner that people should be called to is decolonising, is resisting colonisation. And so very much this movement around resisting the colonial ideologies, resisting the idea that Mākura Tawhiti was terra nullius, Kāreuriwa was terra nullius, Whitireia was terra nullius, resisting that idea is part of awakening ourselves and awakening New Zealanders that ultimately it will not just be Māori that suffer from this ideology. The end point of this ideology, that we have free reign and entitlement to whatever we like, is the destruction of our planet, is the destruction of our societies. And so absolutely, I say to all our mates in the climate movement, you come and join us. You come and join our movement, and you'll find that by working with us in deconstructing those ideologies, we start to move away from the behaviours, the economic systems that have driven climate change. Yeah.
Tina sends her thanks to the panel.
Thanks to you.
We'll hold the questions here for now. What I'd like to do now is just to call on Matua Moana to give us some closing comments.
Tēnā koutou, kei te tautoko ngā mihi kua mihia. Tēnā no koe Tina, koutou hoki ngā kai kōrero, kanu te mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Thank you to our panel. I think we've been very privileged today and thank you to all of you for coming. I'd just like to make 3 brief comments to tautoko what our speakers have said. In 2011, I was asked, along with a Native American scholar, Robert Williams, to talk at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Peoples on the Doctrine of Discovery. And there are about 2,000 Indigenous peoples from around the world. And they all had their own stories of the Doctrine of Discovery. So it wasn't just James Cook or Christopher Columbus, it was Vasco da Gama, it was Balboa, it was Bougainville. There were just hundreds of white men who travelled to Indigenous lands and said, I have discovered you, you now belong to us. And so I think it's important to see the Doctrine of Discovery as part of that worldwide or transnational dispossession of Indigenous peoples. And the second thing is that while it began as a Christian doctrine and was developed in a whole lot of Christian debates in Europe, which have been referred to about whether Indigenous peoples were human and so on, it was also a racist doctrine. Because in 1840, when William Hobson was worried that not enough Maoris were signing the treaty, and therefore, in their words, giving our land voluntarily to Britain, he climbed on a hill in Auckland and declared that he had discovered this land by right of discovery. And by then, a number of Māori were Christian. So the basis of his proclamation of discovery was because we were not white. And all of the doctrines used in the 19th century was race-based. So it's a Christian-sourced but racist doctrine, and colonisation, of course, is a race-based process of dispossession. And the third thing I'd like to just close with in thanking everyone is one of the things that colonisers do in Tuia 250 and what's happening at Mauna Kea are good examples that have been shown to us, how they try to sort of pretty everything up so it looks all right, so it doesn't look like dispossession. And what they did with the Doctrine of Discovery, they developed all these rituals, all these things that they had to do to make discovery valid in their eyes. So they had to plant a flag on the beach so that when Cook landed at Whitianga, he wrote in his log that he raised the colours, that is, he plonked the British flag on the beach and said, this land now belongs to me. And there was a set declaration that they had to read to make it legal and pretty it up in their eyes. And part of that ritual was another document that they developed called the Requiamento, in which they had to read this document requiring Indigenous peoples to submit to them. And if you get a chance to read it, it's a fascinating explanation of what colonisation is, because he said, if you do not submit to our power which we have justly claimed, then we may kill you, we may despoil your women and children, we may make slaves of you, and this is my favourite part, and do unto you such mischief as we may. So there were rituals. And if you follow Cook as just one racist, fascist, syphilitic discoverer, across the Pacific and up the west coast of America, you can trace all of his discovery sites. And at each place, he would raise a flag, he would read the declaration, and then say, this land belongs to England. When he got to Alaska, and he writes down in his log how he exercised the right of discovery in Alaska, he must have run out of flags, because he records in his logs, I claimed this land by right of discovery, and to mark the discovery, I buried an empty bottle and some coins. So for me, then the right of discovery could be claimed either by raising a flag or depositing litter. And it seems to me the depositing of litter is an apt description of what the Doctrine of Discovery led to. So thank you so much again to our speakers. It's especially lovely to have you here, Emalani, from so far away, and to all of you again for coming. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe matua me o kōrero. Time, okay. Okay, so from here, we'll go through, have a cup of tea, have a kōrero if you'd like to, and do you want to carry on afterwards? Okay, cup one. Yeah, and so that's what we'll do. So we've been really blessed today to have our kai kōrero and have this honest discussion, this honest kōrero. It's pretty awesome that we can do that here in our own environment, safely. And so as, you know, once again coming back to Emalani, so with all the kōrero you've got today, strip what you want of it and use what you want of it for our benefit. Yeah. Hei oranga mō ngai tātou, ngā iwi. Ngā iwi, ngā tangata whenua o ngā ao katoa, ngā tangata take mō tātou katoa hoki. I've been really privileged to visit her whenua, and it is beautiful. I've had whānau a visit from along that west coast of the US, and it is, you know, the coloniser was consistent. It was consistent, and so we as a whānau, we need to refuse as a positive action. We need to not just sit on our laurels and just sit here and have this kōrero, but we need to do something about it. So have a think about how you can contribute to that, and we can kōrero more next door. So tēnā ka tuku atu tērākau ki a koe te tōkana e Kerimia nei whakakapi tēnei ki wahi. Mō tātou, tēnā koutou, a tēnā tātou.